What if I told you Kansas was running back you? Yes, that Kansas. The Jayhawks. Well, I'd only be half joking. What's up, guys? It's Deeg, and today we're going to dive into my RBU rankings and how they've evolved over time. Starting with how they looked all the way back from the beginning of the Super Bowl era in 1966 to shorter, more recent time periods. Like my wide receiver U video, my rankings are completely stat-based in an effort to take my bias away from it 100%. Additionally, these rankings will be based off of NFL production for players from each university. I'm not factoring in anything that the players did in college. This is all about how they perform when they reach the next level and have a more even playing field in competition. Here's an agenda of the things I'll cover in today's video with some timestamps for those that want to skip around a little bit. Feel free to pause here, but I'm going to keep moving along to get straight to the content. The first team to lead the league in rushing production in the Super Bowl era is none other than the Jayhawks. They held that lead for 2 years before Morgan State said, "Give me that," and led for 4 years themselves. Then USC takes over in 1972, and you can quickly see why their fans are so quick to claim RBU. They would go on to lead for the next 30 years. Yes, 30. Are they still leading in this time lapse? Yep, still them. It's going to be them for a while. And it wouldn't be until 2004 when Miami finally overtakes them and never looks back. That shouldn't be surprising, as Miami counter with running backs like Frank Gore, Edgerrin James, Otis Anderson, Clinton Portis, Willis McGahee, Lamar Miller, Pete Banashak, I can't even say that right, Chuck Foreman, and many, many more. Some of you may be saying, oh, but Miami is only first in production because Frank Gore played for like 30 years. Well, wrong. You can actually take Frank Gore out of the picture completely, and Miami still leads by a wide margin. But that's not to say that the margin is untouchable. In fact, Alabama has been chipping away at that lead, and fast. Players like Derrick Henry, Shaun Alexander, Mark Ingram, Josh Jacobs, Kenyon Drake, Eddie Lacy, Najee Harris, and many, many more. And we'll touch on Alabama more later in this video when we look at the ranks since 2000 and more recently. Georgia is another school that has some big claims for RBU title, and it's no surprise to see them here at number 3. We have running backs like Herschel Walker, Garrison Hurst, Terrell Davis, Rodney Hampton, Nick Chubb, Todd Gurley, and many more. And then you have Oklahoma, who counts with legends like Adrian Peterson. You have DeMarco Murray, Billy Sims, Joe Mixon, Greg Pruitt, Joe Washington, and obviously many more. And then USC closes out the top 5 since the Super Bowl era with Marcus Allen, O.J. Simpson, Reggie Bush, Mike Garrett, etc., etc., etc. Now, I usually stop at the top 5 for these position rankings, but it's so incredibly tight for 4th to 11th with running backs that I have to at least touch on some of the legends below. I'm not going to do some of these teams justice, but here's a little speed run. Ohio State, you have Eddie George and Zeke. Florida, Emmitt Smith, Fred Taylor. Notre Dame, Jerome Bettis, Ricky Waters. Tennessee, Jamal Lewis, Arian Foster, Kamara. Texas, Ricky Williams, Earl Campbell, Priest Holmes, Jamal Charles, etc., 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 etc. Some of these I will go in deeper later in the video, so hold off on the "but you left blank out." I know, okay? Alrighty, now that we set the stage with the Super Bowl era to present rankings, let's take a look at some shorter time periods, starting with how things have looked from 2000 to now. As you may have guessed from earlier foreshadowing, yes, Alabama does take the lead, but it's honestly very close. Miami has more yards with 57,000, and Alabama has nearly 100 more touchdowns. Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Texas round off the top 5 with pretty similar production each, but let's dive into the team breakdowns. Since 2000, the leading rusher for Alabama is Derrick Henry with 9,500 yards, but per my metrics, he was actually outproduced by Shaun Alexander, who had nearly the same amount of yards, but also 100 touchdowns. Next up, you have Mark Ingram with 8,100 yards, then Josh Jacobs with 5,500, and Kenyon Drake barely beats out Eddie Lacy and Najee Harris to close out the top 5. Next, you have Miami coming in with legendary top 5 and a big drop-off afterwards. So you have Frank Gore with his 16,000 yards, Edgerrin James at 10,700, Clinton Portis just under 10,000, Willie McGahee at 8,500, and then Lamar Miller just under 6,000. Tennessee is led by former MVP Jamal Lewis with 10,600 yards, Arian Foster with 6,500, Travis Henry with 6,100, Alvin Kamara with 5,800, not to mention all of his receiving production as well, and then Charlie Garner with 3,600. Oklahoma had none other than All Day at number 1 with 16,200, followed by DeMarco Murray with his 7,000 yards, Joe Mixon at 6,400, then Ramondre and James Allen just over 2,000 each. Texas closes out the top 5 with a really solid core in Ricky Williams with 9,300, Jamal Charles with 7,600, Priest Holmes with 6,600, Cedric Benson with 6,000, and Donta Foreman with 2,300. If you made it this far in the video, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. That would mean the world to me. But all right, let's keep going. So how do things look in the past 10 years? Well, that's when things start to get silly. Alabama just absolutely ran away with it in the last decade, nearly doubling the second place production from Georgia. Oklahoma comes in third, nearly tied with Georgia, followed by Ohio State, and then LSU, who also barely beats out Wisconsin. Let's dive a little bit deeper. Alabama's insane production is not surprisingly led by Derrick Henry with his 9,500 yards, Mark Ingram with 6,600, Josh Jacobs with 5,500, Kenyon Drake with 3,800, and Najee with 3,200. Next up, you have Georgia, who's led by Todd Gurley with his 6,000 yards and 67 rushing touchdowns. And again, that's not to mention all of his receiving production. Then you have Nick Chubb with more rushing yards at 6,500, Sony Michel at 3,200, DeAndre Swift with 2,700, and James Cook with 1,600 yards already. Right behind them is Oklahoma, behind Joe Mixon, 6,400, Adrian Peterson with 4,800 in the last stretch of his career, DeMarco Murray with 4,500, Ramondre with 2,200, and Samaje Perine with 1,800. Ohio State is not surprisingly led by Zeke with 8,900 yards, which is actually only trailing Derrick Henry in the past 10 years. Carlos Hyde with nearly 5,000, J.K. Dobbins with 1,300, and then you have Den Herron with 400 and Rod Smith with 300. So you can see with Ohio State, it drops off heavily after the first two. And then LSU comes in fifth behind it. Leonard Fournette's 4,500 yards, Jeremy Hill with 2,900, Alfred Blue with 2,400, Clyde Edwards-Helaire with his 1,800, and Spencer Ware with 1,600. For the last 5 years, I won't go into the player details like I did for 10 and even this century, but feel free to comment below if you want any extra info there on any of the teams. But it shouldn't surprise anyone to see that Alabama is running away with it still, followed by Georgia, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin. And then, whoa, it's Memphis. That's right. G5 Memphis is in the top 5 of running back production for the last 5 years in the NFL, behind Tony Pollard, Antonio Gibson, Darrell Henderson, Kenneth Gainwell, and Patrick Taylor. If that impresses you as much as it impresses me, drop a comment below saying G5 respect. Let's give Memphis their flowers. All right, now let's shift gears to the best seasons of all time. And man, this is the most impressive part for me. Alabama has simply had the top 5 best seasons by their running back alums in the NFL ever. And all of those were in the last 5 years. Keep in mind this is rushing stats only, but I can guarantee you it won't change much if you add in the receiving as well. The amount of running back production that has come out of Alabama in the Nick Saban era is nothing short of astonishing. The last 5 seasons in a row were the best of all time. Just think about that for a second. Chances are next year they'll also add another one to the top 6. Now let's give some of these teams their flowers as well. You know, Miami's also present on this list a lot, and if you look at their 6th and 7th spots here, they would be very, very close to that number 5 and number 4 Alabama teams if they had the 17th game season. And they also had 5 of the top 20 seasons ever per my numbers, and all of them were between 2003 and 2007. Then you have Tennessee and Texas, who both make the top 20 twice, both of them with their performances in the 2002 and 2003 seasons. Georgia gets a top 10 performance with their 98 season, and they also have the first season out of the top 20 in 2018. And then you also have Auburn, Notre Dame, Cal, Florida, and Oklahoma, who all made the list at least once. Now, what does the future of the RBU conversation look like? Well, undoubtedly, receiving numbers will start playing a bigger effect going forward, as the game has clearly shifted to more dual-purpose backs as opposed to just the one-dimensional backs. But in terms of who will have the brightest futures, I think there's a few teams to keep an eye out here. First, obviously Alabama, they're not going anywhere. Between Henry, Jacobs, Gibbs, Najee, and more, The Bama pipeline doesn't look like it's stopping anytime soon, and as you saw the last 5 seasons, they're coming for Miami and fast. Secondly, you have Georgia. UGA has no shortage of studs in the league right now with Nick Chubb, Swift, James Cook, Zamir White, etc., etc. They should start giving Alabama more trouble for that number 1 spot each season going forward. Next, we have the Red River duo. Oklahoma is still riding strongly behind Mixon, Stevenson, and Perine, while Texas is on the rise by putting in the first running back drafted in each of the last 2 draft classes. That has only been done once before, and it was by Alabama in 2011 and 12. They also have potentially more on the way with Blue and Baxter, so keep an eye out for the Longhorns. Keeping things in the South, how could I not mention Oklahoma State? With Chuba Hubbard, Jalen Warren, Justice Hill, and soon to be Ollie Gordon as well. They have a strong stable of young running backs. And lastly, in the Big 12, you have Iowa State. They have been quietly producing some stud running backs recently with David Montgomery and Breece Hall, and they also have some stud backs right now. Remember the name Abu Sama? Don't say I didn't tell you. But who do you guys think will be the next big player in the RBU conversation? Let me know down in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, again, please drop a like, support the channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.